My mother's fried chicken was supposed to be my peace, but when two cops unleashed a dog on her porch, they met a captain with an army behind her. The scent of my mother's fried chicken was the first thing that told me I was truly home. It was a smell that could cut through the dust of a Fallujah safehouse, the sterile air of a C-17, or the damp rot of a jungle floor. It was the smell of peace. I sat at her small kitchen table, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, just watching her. Eleanor, with her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun and her movements made slow and deliberate by a touch of arthritis in her hands, was humming an old gospel tune. Her prized rose bushes were framed perfectly in the window behind her, a riot of crimson and pink against the neatly trimmed lawn of her quiet suburban street. This was my decompression. 2 weeks of leave after 6 months in places I couldn't talk about, doing things I tried my best to forget. Here, I wasn't Captain Maya Jackson. I was just Ellie's daughter. I was supposed to be relaxing, letting the tightly coiled spring in my gut finally unwind. But it never really does. The internal threat assessment is always running, a low-level background program that never shuts off. It's what noted the unfamiliar sedan that had cruised down the block twice in the last hour. It's what registered the slightly too loud slam of a car door 3 houses down. It's what made the hairs on my arm stand up a full second before the hammering started on our front door. It wasn't a knock. It was a pounding, the kind that vibrates through the floorboards. My mother flinched, her humming stopping abruptly. A splash of grease popped from the skillet, and she let out a small yelp. Goodness me, who in the world? I was already moving, my body shifting into a low, ready posture before my brain had even fully processed the command. I held up a hand. "Stay here, Mama. I'll get it. Don't be silly, Maya. This is my house." She wiped her hands on her apron, her face a mixture of annoyance and confusion. She was the kind of woman who knew all her neighbors by name, the kind who organized the annual block party. An aggressive knock on her door was an affront to the very order of her world. I followed a step behind her as she walked to the door. Through the little peephole, I could see 2 uniformed police officers. One was young, barely out of his 20s, with a nervous energy that made him bounce on the balls of his feet. The other was older, thicker, with a grey mustache and a face that seemed permanently set in a sneer of mild disgust. The older one raised his fist to pound on the door again. My mother opened it before he could. "Yes, can I help you, officers?" she asked, her voice polite but firm. The older one, Miller according to his name tag, looked past her, his eyes scanning the interior of our home. "Ma'am, we've had a report of a possible burglary in progress at this address." My mother's eyebrows shot up. "A burglary? Here? Officer, I can assure you, I've lived in this house for 40 years. There is no burglary." "We need to come in and check the premises, Mom," the younger one, Davies, said, his hand hovering near his sidearm. I could feel the situation shifting. The air grew thick and heavy. This wasn't a wellness check. This wasn't a mistake. I saw the way Miller's eyes flicked over my mother's simple house dress, the way he took in her neat, humble living room with a dismissive glance. "I don't think so," my mother said, her voice losing its polite edge. "You have a warrant?" That was it. The challenge. Miller's sneer deepened. "We have probable cause. Now you can step aside, or I can add obstruction to the list of charges." "Charges? What charges? For being in my own home?" Her voice trembled slightly, with indignation, not fear. That was my mother. A rock. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural growl from the side of the porch, just out of sight. My blood ran cold. The younger cop, Davies, stepped back, revealing a third officer, a K9 handler with a Belgian Malinois straining at its leash. The dog was a bundle of coiled muscle and teeth, its eyes locked on my mother. "I'm not going to ask you again, lady," Miller said, stepping forward, crowding her. "Let us in." "Get off my property," my mother said, her voice rising. She reached into her apron pocket, and my entire world slowed down. I knew she was reaching for her phone to call her lawyer, her councilman, someone. But the cops didn't. Miller saw the movement, and his eyes went wide with a sort of predatory glee. "She's going for something," he yelled. Davies fumbled for his weapon. The K9 handler took a step forward, the dog now barking, a terrifying, frantic sound that echoed in the small space of the porch. "Mama, no!" I started to move forward from the hallway, but it was too late. I saw the decision in Miller's eyes. He gave a sharp, curt nod to the K9 handler. "Get her." The handler unleashed the dog. It shot forward like a brown missile, a blur of fur and snarling teeth aimed directly at my 70-year-old mother. A cry escaped her lips as she stumbled backward, her hands coming up to shield her face. The world narrowed to that single horrific image. The dog leaping, my mother falling. And in that instant the quiet daughter was gone. The captain took over. A voice cut through the air, low, calm, and resonant with a power that vibrated in the bone. It wasn't a yell, but it stopped everything. The barking, the shouting, the very air itself seemed to freeze. Stand. Down. Now. The dog, mid-air, somehow twisted and landed short, its paws scrabbling on the welcome mat. It looked back at its handler, confused. The two cops, Miller and Davies, spun around. They saw me for the first time, standing in the dim light of the hallway. They saw not the daughter who'd been drinking coffee, but a woman standing in a perfectly balanced combat stance, my eyes as cold and flat as polished steel. They saw something in my posture, in the utter lack of fear on my face, that made them pause. Their hands, which had been reaching for weapons and radios, simply froze in place. They stared, their minds trying to reconcile the woman in civilian clothes with the absolute, lethal authority that had just stopped them dead in their tracks. My mother was gasping for air, her back against the doorframe, one hand clutching her chest. I moved without thinking, a fluid, economic motion that put my body squarely between her and the three officers on the porch. My eyes never left Officer Miller's. I catalogued everything in a split second. The slight tremor in the younger cop's hands, the K9 handler's struggle to regain control of his confused animal, Miller's flushed face, his jaw tight with fury and bruised pride. He was the danger, the loose cannon. "Who in the hell do you think you are?" Miller spat, taking a half-step forward, trying to reclaim his dominance through sheer physical presence. My voice remained level, devoid of emotion. "I'm the woman whose mother you just assaulted with a deadly weapon." I shifted my gaze to the dog, then back to him. "Get it off this property. Now. Then give me your name and badge number. All three of you." The K9 handler, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, started pulling his dog back towards the lawn. The Malinois went, but kept looking back, whining. Miller wasn't backing down. "You're in a whole lot of trouble. You're interfering with a police investigation." "Show me the warrant," I said calmly. "Show me the call log for the reported burglary. Name the complainant. You don't have one, do you? You saw an old black woman tending her roses in a nice neighborhood, and your brain cooked up a fantasy. That's not probable cause, Officer Miller. That's profiling." "And what you just did," I gestured to where my mother was still trying to catch her breath, "is aggravated assault." Every word was a precisely aimed dart. I saw Davies flinch. He knew I was right. Miller's face went from red to a blotchy purple. He was losing control, and in his world, that was unacceptable. He unclipped his handcuffs. "That's it," he snarled. "You're under arrest. You and the old lady. Obstruction of justice." He lunged for my arm. My movement was pure instinct, honed by 1,000 hours of training. I didn't strike him. I didn't have to. I simply shifted my weight, pivoted, and used his own momentum against him. One moment he was grabbing for me, the next he was stumbling sideways, his hand grasping at empty air, his balance completely broken. It was so fast, so effortless, that Davies didn't even see what happened. All he saw was his senior partner suddenly flailing like a drunk. I hadn't moved from my spot. "Touch me or my mother again," I said, and this time there was a razor's edge in my voice, a hint of the violence I was holding in reserve. "And the next call you make will be to a paramedic." I looked straight at Davies. "You need to get him under control. Right now. You are a witness to a felony in progress, and your inaction makes you an accessory." Davies's eyes were wide as saucers. He looked from me to his partner, who was now straightening his uniform, his face a mask of pure rage. For the first time, Davies seemed to realize this wasn't just some domestic dispute. He was in over his head. Just show us some ID, ma'am, he stammered, trying to find some procedural ground to stand on. Miller scoffed. She's not showing us anything. She's going in the car. That's fine, I said, surprising them both. I reached into the pocket of my jeans, moving slowly, deliberately. I think it's a good idea for you to know exactly who you're arresting. I pulled out my wallet and flipped it open. Inside, behind a clear plastic window, was my government-issued common access card. It looked like any other military ID at first glance, but the details were what mattered. The classified security clearance level. The block letters spelling out my name. Jackson, Maya A. CPT. And beneath that, the designation for my unit. A simple string of letters and numbers that meant nothing to most people. But to someone in law enforcement with the right access, it was a key to a world they knew nothing about. I held it out. Davies stared at it, confused. Miller, however, squinted, his cop's brain trying to process the information. He saw the rank. Captain. He saw the Department of Defense seal. He saw things he didn't recognize, and it only made him angrier. A soldier. You think that makes you special? He snatched the wallet from my hand. Let's see how special you are down at the station. He stalked back towards his patrol car, my wallet in his hand. My mother finally spoke, her voice shaky but strong. Maya, what's happening? He's making a mistake, Mama, I said, my eyes locked on the back of Miller's head. A very, very big one. We watched as he got into his car, the radio squawking to life. He was running my name. Davies stood on the lawn, shifting his weight, looking anywhere but at me. A minute passed. Then 2. The silence on the porch was deafening. Then we saw Miller get out of the car. He wasn't walking with a swagger anymore. He was holding his cell phone to his ear, and his face had lost all its color. It was the color of ash. He stopped by the rose bushes, his back to us, listening to the voice on the other end of the line. His shoulders began to sag. He turned around slowly. The sneer was gone. The anger was gone. All that was left was a raw, naked fear I'd only ever seen on the faces of men who knew they were about to die. He looked at me, his mouth slightly agape, and held up his phone as if it were a venomous snake. They want to talk to you, he whispered, his voice hoarse. It's a general. I took the phone from his trembling hand. It felt heavy, a direct link to the world I had just left behind. I put it to my ear. Jackson here, I said, my voice steady. Captain, report. The voice on the other end was like gravel rolling downhill deep, authoritative and utterly unmistakable. General Marcus Thorne, my commanding officer. My eyes were still locked on Miller, who looked like he was about to be physically ill on my mother's prize-winning petunias. Domestic situation, sir, I began. My words clipped and precise, the way he'd trained me. Local PD responding to a non-existent burglary call. Attempted unlawful entry. Escalated to assault with a police K-9 on a civilian. The civilian is my mother. She is unharmed. There was a moment of dead silence on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning, the immense weight of the military apparatus shifting its focus onto a quiet suburban street in Ohio. Stand by, Captain, he said. The words weren't a request. I'm patching in JAG. The local chief of police is about to have a very, very bad 5 minutes. Are you and your mother secure? Affirmative, sir, I said. We're fine, just trying to enjoy my leave. A sound that might have been a grim chuckle came through the phone. We'll see what we can do about that. Stay on the line. He wasn't talking to me anymore. I heard muffled, angry words, the general giving orders in a tone that could make colonels snap to attention. I held the phone, a silent sentinel on the porch, as Miller and Davies seemed to shrink before my eyes. They could hear the faint, furious barking of the general's voice coming through the earpiece. They were no longer cops dealing with a difficult woman. They were 2 insects under a microscope, and they were beginning to understand just how powerful the light was. Less than 3 minutes later, a sleek black sedan without markings came screaming down the street and screeched to a halt behind the patrol car. A man in a tailored suit, his face grim, got out. He walked with a purpose that dwarfed the swagger Miller had shown just minutes before. He strode right past the two officers and stopped at the bottom of my porch steps. "Captain Jackson?" he asked, his eyes flicking from me to the phone in my hand. "I'm Chief Reynolds. General Thorne sends his regards." He practically choked on the word. He looked at my mother, who was now standing beside me, her composure regained. "Ma'am, on behalf of my department, I am so sorry." I handed the phone to him. "The general would like a word." Chief Reynolds took the phone like it was a live grenade. He walked a few paces away, listening, his face getting tighter and paler with every passing second. He kept saying, "Yes, sir. I understand, sir. It will be handled, sir." When he handed the phone back to me, the general's voice was calm again. "Maya, Chief Reynolds will handle the cleanup. You have my number if you need anything else. You tell your mother that the United States Army appreciates her service too. Thorne out." The line went dead. I looked at the chief. He looked at Miller and Davies with a loathing that was almost palpable. "You two, in my car. Now." Then he turned back to me. "Captain, Officer Miller will be turning in his badge and gun before lunch. An internal investigation will be opened, but I can promise you he will never work in law enforcement in this state again. Officer Davies and the K-9 handler will be placed on administrative leave pending a full review and mandatory retraining. A black mark will follow them for the rest of their careers." I nodded slowly, but it was my mother who spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the air like a blade. "You won't be speaking to my daughter," she said, stepping forward. "You'll be speaking to me. Eleanor Jackson, the woman your officer tried to set his dog on my own property." The chief had the grace to look ashamed. He faced her directly. "Mrs. Jackson, there are no words to express how sorry I am for what happened here today, for the fear and disrespect you were shown. It was a failure of training, a failure of character, and a failure of my department, and I will fix it." "You do that," my mother said, her chin held high. I stepped forward. "My mother will be filing a formal complaint, in person, with you, tomorrow morning, and I will be with her." It was a statement, not a request. "My door will be open," the chief said with a nod. He gave one last withering glare to his disgraced officers, who were now standing with their heads bowed like errant schoolboys, and escorted them to his car. We stood on the porch, my mother and I, and watched them drive away. The street was quiet again. The only sound was the chirping of birds and the distant hum of a lawnmower. It was over. I turned to my mother. Her hands were trembling now, the adrenaline finally wearing off. I reached out and steadied them with my own. She looked up at me, her eyes searching my face, seeing not just her daughter, but the captain I had become. "I suppose," she said, her voice barely a whisper, "that's what you do out there." I squeezed her hand. "I protect people, Mama. That's all. Especially my people." She nodded, a single tear tracing a path down her wrinkled cheek. She took a deep breath, and the familiar comforting smell of fried chicken drifted out of the open doorway. It was the smell of peace, the smell of home. And for the first time since I'd landed on American soil, the tightly coiled spring in my gut finally, truly, began to unwind.